topic would be the reopening of our schools for the 2021 school year. And as we move through this presentation, there will be various presenters coming up to the podium, and I'll be bringing those individuals up. So before we really get into the presentation, I do want to share some of the data that's coming out of the student information forms that we have asked families to complete. And so we move here to the next slide. This was as of 2 o'clock this afternoon, and it was as of 2 o'clock because I needed to get everything submitted and uploaded for tonight's meeting, but I also have 4 o'clock numbers. So at 2 o'clock, we had 3,769 surveys completed. At 4 o'clock, we had 3,973 surveys completed. And when you look at the number of decisions that have been made for in-person, virtual, Haven, the numbers are basically identical from the 2 o'clock to the 4 o'clock. So at 2 o'clock, 77.2% in person, and at 4 o'clock, it's 77%. The virtual learning, 14.5% at 2 o'clock, 14.7% at 4 o'clock, and Havens remained at 6.5% both times.
So can I ask a quick question? How many total surveys have gone out? Because there's some parents that have multiple kids. What would be 100% of all the surveys?
About 6,900, approximately 6,950 students.
We're over 7,000 currently in Power School.
Over 7,000 Power School now. So more have added since. So we would need about 7,000 to have 100% completion.
Okay.
But what we have shared with families, and again, this is open till the end of the day tomorrow.
Okay.
But we also know that there are families who we said if it's not completed, then that's indicating to us that it's an in-person decision.
So each student submits a survey, or so a family that has multiple students submits multiple surveys?
That's correct. It's one completion per student.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
On the busing component, we've seen that around the 45% of those needing it versus those that do not. At the elementary level, this is greatly helping to reduce the number of students on our buses. I'll share a little bit more information on a different slide, but that has been a significant help. So we are extremely grateful for parents and guardians who are able to transport their children to and from school, because that is bringing down our numbers on our buses. So we do appreciate that, and thank you.
Mike, do you know, is that in normal conditions, non-COVID, you know what those percentages of students that didn't require busing prior to this? Do we have any idea, Mark or Derek, your transportation person?
I am not sure of that. I can get that information for you.
In the initial survey that we did, 65% of people indicated
Mr. Frank, I just did promote him in the Zoom session, so he may have some numbers.
So Mrs. Zimmerman has one piece, and then Mr. Frank, if he does.
I was just going to let you know, I looked at the initial survey data that we did, that very first survey, and it showed that 65% of people at that point said that they would need busing services.
Okay.
And then Mr. Frank, if you're there, if you could provide
years.
Mr. Frank, are you able to unmute your mic? You're on. You've been promoted as a panelist in Zoom. You may not be listening.
Hear me?
Yes.
Please restate the question.
The question is, in previous years, pre-COVID, what was a typical percentage of kids or parents that did not require busing?
On the elementary level, roughly we would get about an 80%, 75 to 80% given the school ridership. So about 20 to 25% of the students would not be on the bus on a normal year.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Frank.
Thanks.
The other question that we pulled out, just for your awareness, we did pose the question whether or not a student would meet an exception regarding facial coverings, and we outlined what those exceptions are. We're at 95% of the completed forms indicated that students did not meet a criteria for an exception. So what we are finding at this point is that our students are complying. I know here at the high school yesterday, we did a freshman orientation, and it was done differently than years past, but all students who arrived wore facial coverings, as did staff, and there were no issues around that at all. So we're pleased with that. So that was just some of the initial data. Again, it closes tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. And anyone who did not complete a form, schools potentially would be reaching out to those families as well. But we also know that no completion is our indication of in-person. And so we're going to move into the actual presentation itself. As you heard from Dr. Polonis, we've broken this up just based on the different sections that are required under the state's template. And so from the introduction side, we've shared information ongoing in our last 2 meetings from a presentation standpoint. This is basically just a summary. But I'm very pleased to report that, and I know I shared this last week, but the partnership that we are working to build with Penn Medicine LGH to serve as the medical consultants for school districts in the county is progressing in a very positive way. They've been extremely responsive, and they're providing kind of that on-the-go service for us when we have questions. I've been on the phone regularly with several of their team members. And at the same time, as we begin to look at reopening schools, we will be in contact with the Department of Health if we need to. But various guidance, various discussions, focus groups, community surveys. We've really looked at a variety of information as we've been trying to be thoughtful and think about how we return to school. I spoke about this on July 14th and then a little bit again on July 28th. But the emergency resolution, that's a stipulation in school code that actually does give the school board the authority in the event that you feel that we're unable to provide for the attendance of all students in usual hours and classes. There's a resolution that can be passed. And so on the board agenda this evening is that resolution. Basically, we would be declaring, or you would be declaring that there are temporary provisions that we would be putting in place in the event we are unable to meet the attendance and hour requirements for all of our students. And this will not have an implication with regards to any funding, but it does give the authority by the school board then to have the administration work and develop plans and submit them to the Department of Education through our health and safety plan. If we are going to not adhere to the hours or do anything different from a traditional setting. So if you go to the next slide, it just basically outlines what those provisions are. And so we are going to be, we are recommending the 4 options. We are recommending that our students attend school 5 days a week. The only difference for our students is in option 2 is the location of the schooling. They will be at home if they've elected that option, but they are still meeting the hour requirement and the number of day requirement. And so we will be approving this resolution in the event that we need to do something different, such as everybody go virtual, or if we're forced to close. So that is done so that we don't have to wait or backtrack. We can then move right into our alternative plan if we need to be forced to close or reduce that in any way. So that is an agenda item for this evening, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So the next section, I'm going to have Mr. Brooks, our Chief Financial and Operations Officer, talk about cleaning, sanitizing, disinfecting, and ventilation.
While Mr. Brooks is coming up, just because there were questions asked tonight during the request to speak to the board, we have received emails. Sometime during this presentation, will you go through why we're not recommending the hybrid approach to school?
Sure.
I couldn't find it in there, and maybe you have it and I just missed it, but.
So we can, I can either talk about it now if you'd like, or we can address it when we talk about the learning options.
Since Mr. Brooks is already standing there and I don't want to make him angry at me, he can continue. When you think it's appropriate, just
absolutely. I have a note here that we will cover that.
I'm here all night, so it's okay. Whatever's good for you guys.
Well, you might want to go home eventually.
Next slide. So again, just wanted to touch base again. What we're looking to do is focusing on the high touch areas. We're looking to use UVC lights wherever we can to disinfect toys and manipulatives. We got 20-gallon totes that we have modified with a UVC light inside, that the teachers and the aides can put the items in, pop it in there, put the timer on, and then get that sanitized for future use. Every school has the capability of atomizing and disinfecting spray. We have equipment there for them. We have hand sanitizers in the school and around the buildings. It varies between the Perel pumps that you see like this, as well as the Perel hand-free ones, and then some other ones as well. Next slide, please. Again, for ventilation, we're looking to upgrade our HVAC filters wherever we can. There's some techniques that we can use. We have heat recovery wheels that take the air and just recycle it back in and preheat the incoming air. We can turn those off. We're going to lose some energy efficiency, but that will increase the amount of fresh air coming into the room and ventilate out hopefully all the bad air that's in the room. Wherever possible, have windows open. That certainly will help ventilation throughout the room itself, and if they keep the doors open and into the hallway, which in some cases we do not have any HVAC in the hallways depending upon the school. The one issue that I've heard some comments about is, well, we've been told before for safety and security we have to lock and shut the doors. Well, what we're suggesting is the doors are locked, propped open. In the event, God forbid, something should happen, we have a drill, there's some sort of issue in the school, and we need to lock down the rooms, all they have to do is knock out the door stop, shut the door, and we should be ready to rock and roll. We're right back to where we were, but again, it allows for some air circulation throughout the building. Next slide, please.
And just before you go on, because I've heard this mentioned, when we're talking about keeping doors open, this is interior doors.
Correct. Not exterior.
Just because I want the public to realize that we're not opening the front doors and saying, come on in and visit.
Right. Did you want to talk about the stuff inside the classrooms?
We'll come back to that.
Okay, good.
So another question on the HVAC filters, do we know from the science that can actually remove the COVID virus or not?
So basically the current MERV 8 filters are removing about 11% of the things in the air, whether it be allergens, viruses, so on and so forth. By MERV 13, you're removing 46%. So we're increasing that. Our systems are not capable of running HEPA. HEPA would be 98%. The systems aren't designed for that. Will it trap the COVID? There's literature out there that says it does, and there's literature out there that says it doesn't. CDC is recommending it, so we're following those guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions on the cleaning? The one piece we do just want to let the board know that as we are going to be walking through buildings, doing that this week, there is the possibility that we may need to look for some potential contracts with some companies to provide additional support and cleaning services so that we can make sure that, especially in the overnight hours, that all the cleaning is occurring that needs to happen, and that allows then staff potentially during the day to have some extra support. But that's something that we'll be evaluating as we're walking through just building by building to see what truly, based on the staffing levels, is absolutely going to be essential.
Do we think at any point in time we're going to have some type of defined periods at which we will be disinfecting? I guess there's some question about, are we definitely going into kindergarten rooms between the AM and the PM and doing things in there?
So
and if that's too premature, let me know. But I think that would be an important piece.
let me say that I think that we're taking an all-hands approach to this, and everybody's going to have to pitch in and help with this. Certainly, the idea of spraying and wiping down everything is one concept. However, if we go ahead and spray and let it dwell out and dry, that's a much more effective way, according to CDC, on killing off whatever viruses they have. So, for a faculty member or a staff member to go through and squirt down the tables and the other high-touch areas in the kindergarten room, between that period of time when the AM students leave and the PM students are yet to arrive, by the time the PM students come, then that should be technically as clean as we're going to get it type of thing from a virus standpoint. But we can certainly look at things as we move forward. As we said before, there's no playbook on this, so we're kind of figuring this out as we go along.
Understood. Thank you.
And Mr. Brooks, all classrooms will have a spray bottle with
Yes.
the disinfectant. Elaborate there.
Sure. So where our schedule is to have every classroom to have some sort of hand sanitizer. Every classroom will have paper towels. Every classroom will have the disinfectant and spray bottles, at least one, so they can spray down for whatever they need between classrooms, high touch areas, things like that. And again, we're looking to do whatever we can to try and promote as much hygiene in the classrooms as we can, certainly as much hand sanitizer we can get in the classrooms. Some classrooms have sinks, so obviously we make sure the soap's in there. The kids can wash their hands in some of those classrooms, but not all classrooms have sinks. We recognize that too.
Mr. Brooks, in kind of an addendum to Mr. Aloisi's discussion or comment about kindergarten AM to PM, when I think about this, I think of high schools, right? So going from class to class to class to class. So in between each period, what does that look like? How feasible is it to disinfect each classroom, each desk in between classes? What does that look like?
So again, all hands on deck. We would hope that the teachers and the staff members in the classrooms would be able to have time to go ahead and do that. It's not practical to have a custodian come in and clean the building after every class. We'd have quite a lag time between the two, or we'd have to hire quite a few custodians at that building all within that given period, especially the way the bell schedule is at some of the schools. So again, we're trying to take the best approach we can. We're certainly encouraging students to use hand sanitizer before and after when they get in the classroom. Wash their hands, obviously, every chance they get, whether it be for lunch, before lunch, after lunch. You certainly use in the restrooms. So we're making our best effort to make sure that that's as safe as possible.
Fair enough. Thank you. One last question, and this goes back to, and I can't remember what meeting it was or where we were. I remember, and this might not even be possible, but I remember you mentioning something about a fogger.
Yes.
That would be easily applied. It dries relatively quickly. When it does, it disinfects. That sounds pretty easy to me. Is that possible? Is that an option?
It is an option. That's what we'll be utilizing at night. Nighttime custodians, before they leave, will be fogging down every classroom, all high touch areas, with the exception of electrical outlets, because obviously water and electrical, don't really mix too well. We obviously want them to be safe as well, but we would fog that down and essentially atomize it in a very light mist and leave it sit there overnight, so it would kill off anything with that dwell time, which is recommended anywhere between 3 and 10 minutes.
Very good.
So, but it's unpractical to have 500 and some odd foggers in the building. It's just not practical at this point in time.
Understood. Thank you.
I had another question.
Sure.
I don't know if it's Mike or Mark, but I guess one of my biggest concerns is in the high schools and the middle schools, in between classes, the kids walking through the hallways. Because in the classroom, teacher kind of has some control, but in the hallways, what are we going to do to ensure kids aren't, I know in the hallways it's very busy in our high school, especially. Is there anything that we can do to help reduce the possible of people spreading infection in the hallways?
I know at the high school, I was in there today, and they already have blue painter's tape down the middle of the hallway to segregate an area for, left, right, north, south, whatever it happens to be. Obviously, there's going to be a certain amount of a learning curve for the students to not congregate the way that they used to. I mean, let's face it, kids always kind of hang out together. You take up the whole hallway, but I think it's going to be a new normal, and we have every expectation and every hope that the students will want to be part of the solution and make it safe for everybody as well.
Are we going to have any faculty watching the hallways or like they normally do, or what are we thinking there?
There's teachers that are going to be looking out from the classrooms to check out the hallway, as well as there's other folks that are assigned to hallway duty just to make sure that there's nothing nefarious going on normally. But obviously they can sit there and do some crowd control perhaps and just remind students, hey, you want to get in the line over here. We're trying to be safe type of thing, or make sure you have a mask on.
Thank you.
Sure.
I guess I have to ask the question, if we're asking the teachers to check between classes in the high school, possibly wipe down desks, do things like that, how can they be two places at one time?
Well, there's some teachers, I think, that have free periods. It's not everybody at once type of thing. So you do have some teachers have some prep periods or some free periods. It's a matter of something each building is working through those details now. We had a meeting this morning with the principals and going over some of the details with them. They need to come up with a plan for what works for their building. I don't think one size fits all, and it would be unfair
would agree with that.
I'd sit in my office and come up with a plan and say, push it out and say, here's what you got to do, when the reality of it is, in my case, I haven't really seen those buildings function. So, sir.
Mr. Brooks, am I correct that for members of the public or whomever that have operational sort of building level questions, that's available in the comprehensive plan or by contacting the building principal?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I have a question about soft furnishings. Are those going to be in the classrooms, or are they going to be used or not?
Well, that's a good question, because we many classrooms have kind of turned into a dorm room. I know in several of the buildings we've had conversations with the principals where they're having the personal items removed from the building so that we can make sure that we can keep it clean and safe. The atomized spray will sit on top of the fabric. The fabric certainly will absorb it, but we would prefer not to have any of those types of lounge chairs, couches, other things that you might see that people pick up and bring into a classroom, because that's not really conducive to what we're looking to do moving forward.
And that leads me to my second question, and I'm going to show my ignorance in this. In one of the classrooms for special needs kids in the high school, when I assume it's still set up like this, there were couches and chairs in that room, which made me think, what about that room? And then also, because I don't know what level of needs that those kids have in their special classrooms, do they have a need for like a special air filter to be put in there so they don't have to smell all this stuff, or that will help them with their breathing? Or am I just, or we don't need that?
These are good discussion points, and we've had these. So I know.
Yeah, and I'm repeating myself, but I'm sorry. There's so much stuff I don't remember.
Please, we want to make sure all answers, if we have answers to questions that we haven't thought about, we have to think about it.
So we have Dr. Musser and Ms. Galen are here, so they'll be able to
take this. You want me to?
Thank you.
So, yeah, it's a great question. There's certain equipment, chairs, lifts, wedges, all kinds of different things that are used for different students with different needs. There will be some different cleaning that is required for those types of items. Going back to your initial question, though, couches and some of those things, there's been a lot of sacrifice for all parties in making this work. And part of that is removing some of that furniture, some of it's downsizing teacher desks and things like that. I think there is a valid concern about the ability to clean some of these classrooms in their current configuration. But as we simplify these classrooms, as we simplify the setups, we remove some of the other things in that classroom. It really does lend itself to that. But there will be rooms where there are special equipment, just like tech ed, some of other areas where there's going to have to be some different cleaning procedures used because they're actually crucial to the student's education.
And so who's going to do that training for the staff that does the cleaning, so that gets done?
Well, a lot of that cleaning's already done because those machines are essential to the learning of students. So that's not really going to be different because they're very heavy contact items because of their very intended purpose.
Because of that they are
correct
hands-on
for their very use. Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Ms. Galen?
I can also speak to, I've been working with the occupational therapist for the district, and she is going through with her assistant the sensory rooms, which also have materials and supplies that would be a concern for cleaning. And then next week, I'm working with the teachers as far as cleaning protocols for some of the smaller classes where there are items that could be questionable as far as cleaning, and then we're going to make decisions about what to do with those things, whether we can cover them, replace them with something else, or just remove them from the classroom for the time being.
And so if you need to replace items and they're needed for therapy for whatever reason, you have adequate funds to order that and replace them with something different that would be, if it's more hard surface, if you will. Or
correct. If it's pertaining to the needs in students' IEPs, absolutely. If not, then it might be something we just, it's just nice to have. And okay. At this time, we'll just have to do without. But yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to take a step back, and maybe this is a ridiculous thing to say, but at least third or fourth grade and above, isn't it conceivable for a student aide to be responsible for the simple basic cleaning when they come into the classroom, possibly for extra credit, like the doorknob and desk, or even at the high school level, rather than it having to be the teacher? I'll give you an example of like just in athletics, wrestlers mop the mats. Couldn't a student theoretically be able to do that?
Mr. Brooks, any challenges on that from a CDC or OSHA?
I mean, it seems like it'd be safer for them to do it than the teachers.
Right. So we want to be, anytime we involve with student labor, we want to be very cautious because there's a certain amount of training to use the chemicals. There's certain insurance requirements that we have. We have MSDS sheets and SDS sheets to be able to make sure that those chemicals that we're using, we have all the data necessary. God forbid there happen to be misused in any way, squirted in the eye or ingested. We have that. So I'm always erring on the caution that we don't have students do that because we don't want to ever put them in a situation that could be endangering them, especially in that lower grade level. Certainly at the high school level, with regards to the mats and stuff like that, I think that's pretty much common practice. Every school I've been in, the students have been, or student managers have been responsible for spraying down, mopping down the mats before and after, various events type of thing.
Well, I just figured that would be in the same spirit of cleaning off a simple desk or doorknob in a classroom. The products we're using obviously have to be safe to a certain degree because we're putting it.
They also meet the CDC requirements to kill off any type of COVID or SARS type of.
Sure, so they can't be like that dangerous to a child.
Well, we're not using bleach.
Right.
So nothing that's that caustic. The chemicals have come a long way. When I first started in this business, when you cleaned a toilet, you put the toilet acid in there. If that wasn't bubbling up and smoking, the thing wasn't clean. We've come a long way from that.
As far as child labor, I mean, obviously you know the law better than I do. I mean, if you're offering a reward of some sort, extra credit, let's say, for so-and-so who's volunteering to clean the desk this week, I mean, it's probably been done in the past in other situations.
It actually is something we talked about in our principal meeting this afternoon, exploring. Obviously, there's a different threshold for what we're asking students to clean. I think it's reasonable to have them take a wipe and wipe their desk down that they're sitting at. It's their desk. That's pretty common practice. I don't see any issue with that. But we do want to engage in some additional conversations with legal about what's advisable, how far can that cleaning go outside of the student's own personal area. We are really working with our students to take responsibility for their face coverings and cleaning their hands and all those practices. So cleaning their area up around them before and after they start, especially in those high exposure classrooms, FCS areas of that nature is something we are investigating further to see how far can and how far should we go with students cleaning in the classroom.
So the last analogy I would bring to that, so I understand exactly what you're saying and the concern, but for many years, kids have been cleaning mats that are potentially infected with MRSA, herpes, and any other thing. And I've never heard a consideration about that or concern.
Well, again, that goes back to, that's a voluntary activity that they've chosen to participate in as far as something that's part of their education that we'd have to require them to do. So that's where that difference would be. But your point's well taken.
Thank you. So we will move on to the next section then.
So as Mr. Bramirsky said, some of these slides may look familiar to you. However, there is some new information as we continue to refine our plans. We've been working on these plans obviously night and day for the last couple of weeks. Something that is we new here that we want to have that conversation about is that PPE for bus drivers was something that was not part of the last presentation as we were continuing to work on what that looked like. And we will be having drivers wear that PPE. We also will be making sure that all students, no exceptions, are wearing those face coverings on the bus. Something else that Mr. Brooks referenced earlier, he was working with STA on some of the cleaning procedures and to finalize what exactly that cleaning procedure will be. And if the cleaning procedure is not completed properly, it's okay for that bus to be a little bit late to that next stop, because cleaning and safety is going to be a priority for us. We know that the bus is a high contact area. We're still working with that 2 per seat limit. And, everything else is pretty much the same, filling from the back to the front and trying to sit household members together, which again, just makes sense from an exposure.
And if I can just add in that bottom elementary AM, PM numbers, those were based off of the 2 o'clock numbers. But as of the 4 o'clock numbers, we're down anywhere from like 2.1 to 2.2 and in the morning, and 1.9 to about 2.1 in the afternoon. So those numbers keep going down, which is a good thing for us. And again, we're very appreciative of the community support there.
Just curious, what is the PPE for the drivers?
The PPEs for drivers, unfortunately, the state can't seem to get everybody on the same page. It was referenced earlier by one of the public comments. If you look at, for example, SEPTA buses down by Philadelphia, they install plexiglass to isolate the drivers from passengers coming on board. We're not allowed to do that on a school bus. So they're only allowed to wear a mask. We're not allowed to put on hand sanitizer that's alcohol-based because it's a potential fire hazard. So the Department of Transportation, the state police, they're not on board with getting the same type of capabilities for a school bus as they are for a commercial transport under the PUC. So
it's basically they'll be wearing a mask like
correct.
the students.
They'll be wearing a mask. Correct.
Okay. Before we get into the learning options, I'll address the hybrid piece here. I know we talked about this at our July 14th meeting, a little bit on the July 28th. So as we were working on planning options, when we did our initial survey that Mrs. Zimmerman referenced, a lot of feedback in that survey indicated from a majority of the parents that they did not want March through June replicated. They wanted students back in schools. And so when we look at the hybrid model, there's multiple factors that go into that. In a hybrid model, in the truest sense, students are coming to school, for example, 2 days a week, and then at home for 3, and then the other remaining students come in, they're at home for 3 days, and then come in on 2 days of the week. And part of the reason of why we did not move down that path was because, again, hearing from our community of not wanting to replicate March through June. Well, in that hybrid model, you're replicating March through June on the days that the students are not in school, because the teachers then on the days when Group A is no longer in school, they are teaching the students who are in Group B. And so the teachers would not be available for those students. So the students would be logging on, getting assignments, and moving forward. So that's one aspect of that. The other aspect of if we force families into the hybrid model or have that as an option, we are constantly having students coming in and out of classrooms. So if we gave multiple options, such as in-person or a hybrid, day to day, we are needing to change the number of desks moving in and out of a classroom to allow the desks to be spaced apart as much as possible. At the same time, if we force the hybrid onto everybody in the district, then we are causing a problem for our entire community from a daycare perspective. And while some families have the ability to have someone in their home or have their children go somewhere on the days that they're not in school, not all families have that option. So yes, we can work with the Hempfield Rec, who has been a great partner of the district. We can work with other entities, but that's at a cost to the families. And that cost potentially could be a factor as to whether or not a student can go into that daycare service. And so as we looked at all of these options, it was considered, but we did not feel that it was an option that would be beneficial to our entire community. It may benefit some of the community, but as we look at the entire population, it would be very difficult. So that's where we were coming down and looking at ways that we could provide choice, but then allow individuals to make that choice whether they want their child to attend school or not. If they don't feel comfortable with children being in school 5 days a week, we have that option for them to either be at home or joining on through our cyber learning option or home education. And so that was through the basis of conversation that we were trying to weigh the pros and cons and why we were swayed away from the hybrid. Again, other districts are considering this at some levels. We have some districts in the county, and again, not all of them, but there are some districts in the county that are looking at some elementary age students going 5 days a week. For example, kindergarten through second or third grade might go 5 days a week. Third and fourth then on up, depending on how that's broken out, is going 2 days a week. And so that also, that kind of setting also creates difficulties for families when they may have one student who's going 5 days a week, another one going 2, and the parents are having, it just keeps going with potential unintended consequences. So our approach on this was to give the parents the choice. If you feel comfortable with your child in school, you have that option. If you don't feel comfortable with them at school at this point, we're recommending to take it marking period or trimester at a time to make that decision. So that was the basis for that conversation. And at this point, I'll turn it over.
Just follow I'm not sure about all the school districts, but the one that's mentioned is the school district of Lancaster. And my understanding is tonight that while we're having our board meeting, they're having a board meeting to reconsider possibly changing to something else virtual or doing something else at this point.
That is correct. And so, as we are proposing these options, again, we believe that the parent should be provided choice. However, as a board who is the governing body that needs to approve this plan, if you feel that based on what you're hearing or based on your thoughts at this point that all students should be online, then that's a conversation we can have. But again, that's taking that choice away from families. But that is a possibility. You can go all virtual with students. And if these options aren't sufficient from a board perspective, then we can engage in more conversation after we're done this session.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Question on the second option that I thought of between last week and now. The students that are virtual, say they join a classroom that has kids that are live, will they be able to see each other?
They will be able to see the teacher or what the teacher has the camera focused on, meaning the teacher, the board, or learning materials. It's not that the camera's in the back of the room where they see everybody. So if there is an opportunity where there needs to be some discussion, that would be set in potentially a small group or one-on-one, potentially a student who's virtual with a student where they're engaging in that conversation. But the initial piece with the camera in the classroom through the iPad or computer that belong to the teacher is that it is right with the teacher. And so the students who are at home are seeing the teacher teach, they're hearing the teacher teach, they're seeing what the teacher wants them to see on the board, or if they're sharing their screen on a particular learning material or document that they are walking through for the students. Mike, you want to
say that also doesn't preclude, though, students in the classroom working in a small group with students that are at home at the same time in the class. So you still have the option to kind of mix and match the classroom however you would want.
So students at home could be interacting with students virtually?
Depending on how the teacher organizes the lesson in the day, yes. I mean, the students in school still all have their iPads and can join the same video conference that the teacher's running for the students at home, if they choose to do that as part of the lesson.
Because I thought there was an issue last spring, Mike, where you said something about you can't show the whole classroom online.
No, from what we were talking about then is having to record sessions and, and going down that path. But what we are looking at is not having that camera kind of being a 360, as the teacher's moving around. Basically, that camera will be on what the teacher wants the students at home to see.
So there will be, if we have this mixed classes, which we think we might, unless there's one total virtual class, those students will be able to interact, virtual will be able to interact with live students.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you.
However, it's designed from the teacher's lessons.
Yeah, I mean, primarily it would be interacting with the teacher, asking questions, being able to see the board. If you imagine sitting basically in the front row of the classroom and looking right at the teacher and the board, that's more or less the view that you're likely going to see most of the time, unless the teacher organizes something else, uses a different camera, arranges another work group.
And then they can join the class.
I just want to chime in briefly to Mr. Maris's point. In my judgment, that's one of the greatest beauties of this hybrid synchronous hybrid model is that the students get that real-time interaction with each other, and there's not the social isolation that they experienced last spring.
I think, if you think about a regular classroom, it all depends on what's occurring on that given day through the design of the lesson. The level of interaction, the group activity, all of that is based on the teacher planning their lessons and determining the types of student learning activities that will go on day to day.
I think Mr. Bromierski covered this slide pretty well. You can see our options up there. This graphic has been out for a while, and I'm sure you've seen it before. One thing I just want to echo again, though, as I've been talking with parents, and I'm sure we've all been receiving emails, we've all been taking phone calls from concerned parents. No matter where they're at in the argument, almost all of them have thanked us for the choice, for the ability to put that decision in their hands and let them make a decision that's right for their unique family situation. If you go back to when we first went online back there in March, that was one of those things we talked about, those learning environments. They're still there. Why we believe school is the great equalizer. There's certain learning environments, there's certain other issues that are at home that maybe make a decision better for another family as opposed to another family. So that is one thing that I really feel like we focused on, and I think the community appreciates the choices that we've given them.
Also, these are not final decisions. I mean, if it doesn't work for a family, as I understand it, you can switch, correct?
So we will...
At certain times, not just random
right.
switching.
Correct. The only choice that we will allow a change at any time, there's two of them. So in person, if a parent and student choose in person and they get to school and they feel like they just aren't comfortable, they don't feel safe, we will absolutely permit that student to make that switch to virtual. We are not doing the switch from virtual back in until the end of the trimester at the elementary or the end of the marking period at the secondary level, so that we have that ability to get routines and the spacing in the classrooms in place. Haven Online is our semester-based courses. That's how it's broken up, so that's a semester piece. Home education, or what we typically know as homeschooling, those students are not Hempfield School District students. While they live in our attendance area, they're not in our system as students of the district. And so if a parent were to choose that we tried homeschooling, it's not working, we're coming back to the district, when they come back to us and kind of re-enroll, we have 5 days to get them back into the school setting. So they will have a choice at that point.
Okay. Question with the virtual, maybe this is to clarify something. If I'm a parent at home and I've picked the virtual thing and they're in the classroom and the student has a question, it's just like being in a regular classroom, correct? It might be at a different time, but they will, if Dr. Musser's my teacher, I can say at the appropriate time, put up my hand or say, Dr. Musser, I don't understand what you mean by that.
Right. And it'll depend from class to class. Sometimes it'll be the chat feature, sometimes it'll be the verbal feature, and it'll depend on the lesson or what they're doing. But that's really the idea behind it, yes, to try to simulate that as much as possible.
That's what I thought. I just wanted, because that was some of the questions I got is clarification, because I think some parents are thinking that they're going to end up being in the same role they were in March through the end of school as the teacher with that. But basically then their responsibility is to make sure that if they're in the elementary school at 9 o'clock, they're getting on, and in the middle school and high school whenever they're supposed to get on.
So we're kind of actually working on that right now, different responses and responsibilities for different people in that virtual environment. And one of those columns is a parent guardian responsibility that we can share then.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Forgive me if this was asked at the last meeting that I missed last week. Hypothetically, we have either a student that's actually attending school gets infected, or someone in their home gets infected and they have to quarantine for what I believe now is 10 days, not 14. Is that child allowed to be put on virtual school at that moment?
Yes.
Okay.
And that will not count against them from an attendance standpoint either.
How about a teacher that gets infected? How's their attendance figured?
asymptomatic, and if they are able to continue teaching, they would be able to teach from home for the time period. We would have a substitute in the room who will be monitoring the students in person, and that would not count against them in terms of sick days, things like that.
That's fantastic.
And just real quick about switching from virtual to in-person. Mr. Bomerski, you stated that they would generally not be able to switch from virtual back to in-person other than at predetermined intervals. I assume there will be administrative flexibility if there are extenuating circumstances to justify what I'll call an off-cycle switch.
Yes.
Will there be some procedure?
Yes, and a lot of that is reviewed based on meetings with families, having those conversations, plans have been tried, put in place, things like that. Yep.
Thank you.
I just wanted to step in. I've been working with parents over the last week, returning phone calls and emails pertaining to the options and how it relates to special education. And I just want to reassure families that if you have questions, please reach out. But as far as the in-person and the virtual option, we are able to deliver the special education services the same way that we would if we were in school. They will receive their special education services synchronously, whether it's with the classroom that they work with or the group they work with. As far as the Haven option, I've talked with families. We'll be working one-on-one with those families to look at the IEPs and make sure that, again, we're delivering the services that are outlined. And as Mr. Bomerski said, in homeschool education, those students are not Hempfield district students, so we do not provide special education services to them.
Thank you.
I have another question, Mike. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Testing will be the same test for a student that's virtual versus the student that's actually in the classroom.
You want to tackle that?
We actually had that conversation this week as well. We are looking at different assessment options. We know that some things will not look the same at home and or in the classroom, some of our diagnostic testing and things like that. So I was just talking with principals this afternoon about what that may look like, and then we do need to have further conversation about that. In terms of classroom assessments, we are encouraging teachers, which we had encouraged also from March to June, to have as much assessment and assignment and anything that they are doing to be put in Schoology so that things can be done synchronously within the classroom and at home. With that being said, we do know that there's work that needs to be done with that. And that is something that we will be working with our curriculum specialists and our department coordinators to continue that work to make sure that we are assessing fairly, and then looking at what we're actually teaching and assessing what we're teaching. So some of our common assessments may end up looking different as the year goes on, and we are going to be working with teachers on that. So that is part of our curriculum work. So to answer your question, we will be doing the assessments both in person and virtually for those students who are tuning in. But we need to see what those assessments are going to look like. It could mean that the assessments look a little bit different this year. It could mean that we're doing a little bit, I know some of the departments, specifically science, we're working on some more project-based type of assessing. So we're going to be continuing that work. But is it something that we have completely fleshed out today? No, but it is definitely on our radar. We are working with various groups on those.
So a little off topic from what you were just saying, I'm looking at just straight up. You have students in the class, you have a student at home. The student at home goes, oh, I don't know the answer to that. Googles it right on their computer.
Oh yeah, that was a huge conversation this week. One of the things we talked about specifically with looking at our assessments are how many of our assessments are, I don't even know if this is a word, but Googleable kind of thing versus, I just probably made that up. But also, what are we asking students to know, understand, and do? So if it looks like that, those are some of the first assessments we're going to be looking at as what is an assessment and what are we actually assessing? Could we then have some discussion afterwards? Could we do some additional check-ins? Could we do some additional formative assessments so that our playing field is leveled? In addition to that, we may look at changing a form of an assessment so that the playing field, and there are some teachers that will, certain assessments, they tell everybody to use their notes. They tell everybody to use their study guides. So those are all conversations we've already begun to engage in.
Can we talk, were you going to say something?
Please.
Can we talk a little bit about staff workload in the virtual piece? Seems to be some concern about, this is all new and, how are we going to make this work? And whatever PD we're doing up until start of school.
Yeah. Yeah, I can start. So one of the things that we had mentioned, I believe last week, was that what we had planned for the beginning of the school year and some of our professional development options will have to be revised, and we will be putting more of a focus on what does instruction look like. Next Thursday, I have a group coming together we have a group coming together to test out what the, synchronous virtual and in-person classroom looks like, and what are some things that we can actually push out as starting points for our teachers. We don't want teachers to have to try to figure it all out on their own. We want to give them some things and tools to say, okay, this is a really good starting point for this. In terms of the Schoology piece, that was something that we started to roll out at the end of last year. So we really want to, and at the high school, I know a lot of our teachers and middle school already have Schoology up and running for their classes. The elementary level, there are definitely certain things in math and science and social studies that are in Schoology already. So we're going to utilize those things and we're going to capitalize on those things. But then we are also encouraging teachers to make sure that Schoology is kind of the hub for things, because in the event we would be forced to close at any point in time, it's there, and we're not trying to create that like we were at the end of last year.
I think the other part of this too, and we recognize that, yes, this is different. This is new in education, and this is a risk. But we believe that we need to try this for our students to give them that opportunity to resume that day-to-day instruction that has been missed since March. And as we move forward with this, I've shared with our union leadership. I've shared with our teachers in a meeting yesterday, and I will continue to reiterate this, and I will say it here this evening. We need to take this one day at a time, one step at a time. I shared with our principals this morning, as we've been thinking about the upcoming school year, at the end of every year, you start thinking about, okay, these are things we want to accomplish for the upcoming school year. And we've had to scale that back. And I shared this morning with our administrative team that there are two goal areas for the upcoming year: providing instruction in an in-person and virtual experience, and focusing on equity, diversity, and inclusion. Those are it. Those are the two focus areas. We need to be able to dedicate our time, energy, and efforts on providing the best quality of education we can for our students. And that means that those in-service opportunities that, where we wanted to have certain things going on and all these different events and places, we're going to stop. We're going to go backwards, and we're going to say, no, this time is going to be working with our teachers on the instruction with students in class and in a virtual setting, and how we can best do that. And there is some trial and error with this as we move forward. And that's one of the beauties of education. As we take, something new and we try it, we're going to have successes and we're going to have some stumbling blocks. And we learn from those stumbling blocks, but we have to work together. And so I'm committed to making sure that not only is there time for this, but that the support and the focus is on this as a priority for the district. And it would not be fair to anyone to pile on more than that with our staff. And so we are going to have to take it one step at a time. And as we begin, Mrs. Hoover spoke about, starting next week, there's groups that are going to be coming in and talking through step by step, the in-person virtual piece, building up to actual model lessons and letting people see both sides of this, what it looks like from a teacher's lens, what it looks like from a student lens. We need to have that perspective. We'll be working with our tech team, with principals, with teachers, our union leadership, as we move forward and as we have been. And that must happen in order for this, for us to do our best here for our kids.
So in your opinion, we can ramp this quickly enough that, well, I know you said there would be risk, and there's risk with everything here we're looking at right now, that it would not be a disaster as opposed to just starting virtually.
I think either way, you are going to have to experience that virtual instruction, that virtual learning. So whether you have students in the classroom or not. And so while it might be easier in some respects, if all students are in the same mode of learning, the same type of preparation is going to be needed from the standpoint of what will that look like from me teaching and then getting all those materials to those students. So would it be easier from the mode? Yes, all students in one mode, absolutely. There's still time and energy and investment that needs to be made to make that happen. And there's still a lot of hard work for that to happen. The positive side right now is our teachers, they know in-person instruction. The challenge is going to be now, what does that look like when I have students in both modes? How do I teach and make sure that I'm engaging both learners? And so that's what we're going to be able to work with them on, recognizing that we're going to take it one step at a time. So to answer your question, yes, I do believe it would be easier if everyone was in one mode. That would take that choice away from families. And so that's a decision that would need to be wrestled with, discussed, as we move forward.
Thank you.
I have a go ahead.
Mr. Mayor. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay. You said going backward. I don't view this as going backward. We've talked about that we're going to have to get ready for online learning, virtual learning anyway. So we're just doing it sooner than under different conditions from what we had thought, condensing in a few weeks what we thought was maybe going to be a 2-year project. I think the cooperation will really, in the partnership between the teachers is key here. And to know that they have the support of parents, they have the concern. I mean, I've seen a lot of, we are really concerned about our teachers. Is this too much of a burden? And I think we have people in place with our principals, assistant superintendents, hopefully who will be very attuned to that and be able to jump in that particular classroom and give the support that that teacher needs exactly when it is needed, because it's invaluable to our children. It's really, really, really important because that's what we do here. When you were talking about bringing people in, you were saying, as I understood it, just talking it through. Are you actually going to do trial runs like
Yes.
And Mrs. room and Dr. Musser's in one room and you try to teach a class and you try to keep up with Mr. Bromerski sitting right there, talk to me, and then you go, no, I got to look at the screen. So you're actually going to be doing that, not just modeling it, but your teachers will be doing those trial runs. And I would think that would be really important. And is the equipment ready? Whatever kind of equipment they need, is it all ready?
As far as equipment goes, they're using the laptops and iPads that our teachers have had for years at this point. Google Meet's the video conferencing solution they used in the spring. So we've refined and expanded a lot of our training materials that we had put together in the spring for that, going into the sessions that we're offering here, are going to be offering coming up here. There is additional equipment in terms of Bluetooth headsets. Mics we needed to pick up to make sure that the audio from the teachers comes through clearly, whether you're wearing masks, face shields, things like that. That will definitely degrade audio if you're going to be relying on what's in the laptop. Those headsets and other equipment we've ordered. We're waiting for that to arrive, but we've been kind of making preparations regardless of however this option plays out with online instruction.
And then I'm just remembering from years past, observing classrooms, sometimes they need tall stands, sometimes they tabletop. Do they stand up and just move their laptop around with them? I mean, You know, things like that, or do they just ask, each teacher just ask for what they think they might need?
I mean, again, they're relying on a lot of the equipment that they already have.
Okay.
Some of this is going to play into how the existing classrooms are laid out just from a social distancing perspective of the kids that are in the classroom. As we talked about, there is some loss of flexibility already with where furniture can be placed. Teaching in person is going to look different than it did in previous years. This is just kind of another component of that.
Okay, thank you. Are they going to be, I don't know how to phrase this positively, are we really going to be ready?
So as you were talking, I was thinking about our teachers. And one of the things that I know about our teachers is we at Hempfield have amazing people working with us. That doesn't diminish feeling overwhelmed. However, sometimes I feel as though we as educators, and I put myself in that same boat, they don't give themselves enough credit for being that for a student. We spent some time today talking to principals about opening school differently than we normally do. K to 12. We need to focus on the social emotional piece. We need to focus on students coming out of their homes, some of them being out of their homes and then having to social distance differently than what they've been doing. Teachers in that same boat. One of the things that I will say as educators is we want to do what's right all the time. And in person, we can gauge what's right pretty easily. We try it, it doesn't work, that wasn't right. We do it a different way, now it's right. In this situation, living in that uncertainty, right isn't as black and white as it always was. And that's a part that I feel like we need to work with our teachers to understand, and to understand that when they are going through this process, we have varying levels of comfort. We will have varying levels of what can be done, and then we will continue to work with them. What we do know is our teachers know how to teach, and they can do it so that students learn. So the logistics of it all, we will have to have some trial and error, and we will have to have some support due to uncertainty. And we will have to say, you know what, that did not work today. We got to try something else. But that's the beauty of being in education, because the one thing that I can say is there is no day that was the same. I can come here and be in a 5th grade classroom today, and tomorrow it is like, where am I? And so we start again, and kids start again, and our teachers have to be comfortable starting again. So with that being said, we are going to put as many supports in place as we can for teachers, for principals, for parents, for kids, and we may have to revisit some things, and we know that. And I just encourage people to understand that it is not necessarily going to be perfect day one, and it's not going to be black and white, right or wrong. It's going to be, we're doing this today, and then tomorrow we're going to do it again, or we're not, in terms of what our lessons look like. So with that being said, the training and the professional development at the beginning of the year is going to be a lot of how are we doing this starting day one? So will they be ready? If you're looking at ready being like, I got this, we got this, the answer to that is yes, but with revisions as we go along. And that's like that anyway, in person. Because you get your class that first day, you don't know those students. The kids who left you are not the kids who walked through the door. So it's brand new anyway. So we do want to spend some time really learning who our students are virtually, learning who our students are in person, spending that time on that social emotional piece for everyone, and then building upon that.
And I think the other piece, it's going to require everybody to slow down. You know, we're in a rapid pace regularly, especially even in schools. You know, we keep moving quickly through things. And so this is going to force all of us, and for a good way for us to just slow down and take it step by step so that we have the ability to make sure we are, utilizing those supports. We are checking in with students both in person and virtually. And as we move forward with this, the hope would be that we can transition back to everybody back in school. I mean, that's what we ultimately want. But there are other extenuating circumstances that are out of our control. And so right now we need to focus on what we can control. And one question that we've had, I'm going to ask Mike Graham this question, is, can our infrastructure handle this? That has come up in several conversations and several requests. So, Mr. Graham, can our infrastructure handle this?
Yeah, and as we've talked about before, I'm not worried about the infrastructure here. On any given day, or I should say on any beginning of the school year, the capacity, usage, network, all that stuff is probably about four to five times what goes on a normal day throughout the year. Just with everything starting back up. We've gone through a number of upgrades this summer, whether it's with our connection with the IU, our secondary connection that we talked about back in January. The infrastructures and the hardware, if you will, is kind of the easy part. It's really all of the other pieces making it work in the classroom, which generally speaking is how tech is supposed to be. That's the easy part. Or how it should be. But we have spent a lot of time on infrastructure this year, previous years. We've ramped our one-to-one program up for the last, I've lost track at this point, I think 6 years almost. We've built that infrastructure out very, very well. I would stack our network up against pretty much anyone in this half of the state. If anyone can make this work from a technical perspective, it would be us.
Isn't it true, Mike, Maria, and Tab, that this option 2 is different than what we were doing in the spring and probably has a lot better chance at success than what we were trying to do last spring? Is that a correct statement?
I would say that is a correct statement. When we shut down in March, it was a declaration at 3:00 on a Friday. We had students who left with nothing. They had already been dismissed. We had students who came home with babies for the weekend for FCS. We had all kinds of things, that we shut down, and it was your in-person all of a sudden came to a halt. And by such and such a date, you need a plan and you need to be online. And we were not we weren't online focused, K to 12. So with this option, with the virtual learning option 2, this is a planned effort to make sure students are receiving what is happening in the classroom in an environment that is working for their family. It does require an adult or a learning coach or, somebody to kind of monitor the learning. But it is not going to be, okay, we're going to Google Meet at 10 o'clock, and some teachers are Google Meeting, some teachers are not. Some people are more comfortable on Schoology. Some kids were already doing Edgenuity courses and were halfway through them and weren't quite sure what to do with it from there. There was a lot of open-ended work that was happening that came to a halt. This is more focused on what is happening in the classroom will happen outside of the classroom as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Maurer had a question, so I'd like to give him the opportunity now.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of letters and comments in the past week or so, and some of the assertions in those comments, I believe, are absolutely incorrect. But I'm going to put my question directly to the 3 administrators I see, Mr. B, Maria, and Mr. Musser. Or Dr. Musser. My question is that our teachers, is there a sense with our teachers that the vast majority of them are ready to come back? Or as some have asserted to us, they're scared to death, they're not prepared to come back, and we have been unfair to them by intermingling this in-person and virtual option on them. So it's actually a 2-part question.
Sure. What I can share based on information that was shared with me about a third of our teachers are, yes, we're ready to be back. A third of our teachers want to be online, and a third of our teachers feel like it's unsafe to be back. Now, I will just say that in general sense. I think everybody has a heightened level of concern right now because this is an unknown. What is it going to look like? There is a heightened level of concern partially because we were forced to close when we did not have COVID in the county. And we shut down, we were forced to shut down. And so from March till now, a lot has happened in the world. A lot of attention around COVID, a lot of lives have been lost around COVID. But at the same time, a lot of tests, the COVID tests have occurred. And what we're finding in reading the data on that end, and whether you believe it or not, a lot more individuals being tested are testing negative than positive. Yes, COVID exists, and I think part of our challenge right now is there is just a level of fear or uncertainty about what is this really going to look like. Am I going to get COVID by walking into the doors of the school? And we've seen media reports of some camps, of schools in other states with high percentages. And a lot of that, what we're reading about, again, strictly off of reading information, is it's hard, PPE potentially wasn't used or protocols necessarily weren't in place. You don't contract COVID just by walking through the doors of a school. You need to be within close proximity. And that time frame that we're looking at is what's coming from the Department of Health, less than 6 feet for 10 or more consecutive minutes. And so to answer Mr. Maurer, from my perspective, there's concern all around. And I think partly because it's an unknown. But as I've shared before, this is not an education issue. And my personal belief on this is that this is about one's comfort level with living in society in an era of COVID. There are a lot of unknowns and risks. And it's how we choose to respond to those risks, what we choose to do every day with regards to our own adherence to recommendations and guidelines. And it's making sure that as a community, we're coming together to provide the necessary support. And so we've been engaging in conversations on multiple levels, with multiple groups since March when we were forced to close. And yes, we are tasked with a plan to have a plan to reopen schools in whatever fashion we deem appropriate to recommend to the board. And as we've listened to parents, I actually had a parent who emailed me today, and I quickly read it before I came over here, and it said, we're trying to please everybody on this, and we should just make that decision, to Mr. Aloisi's question, just go virtual for everybody. But what we've heard from individuals is they should have the choice. That's what we've heard. While we've also heard at the same time that families want a hybrid or families want us to make the decision, we've given that choice. And as a result of giving that choice, there are now lots of questions. We've developed lots of FAQs. I think we're over 130 questions on our website. All that and trying to provide answers. We are never going to have all of the answers, but we are doing our best to be able to, one, mitigate risk. That is all we can do. I was asked today to provide a guarantee that COVID spread won't happen. I cannot guarantee that. Nobody can guarantee that at this point. And so this is going to be challenging. But that collaborative effort, that collaborative spirit, working together, I believe we, as Mr. Graham said, we have the ability to do this. And I believe we need to try for our students. If it doesn't work, we will be back and saying this isn't working. We need another option. But on the onset of doing this, as being in education, we're all going to be beginners with this. And when you're a beginner with something, there's apprehension, there's uncertainty, but there's also a sense of, I can do this. And as you talk through it, it is going to be a little more challenging. There's no denying that. And that's where I think our job is to make sure that we are prioritizing where we're spending our time moving forward with our staff. And giving that time, giving that support, I think is absolutely essential. And if I pile on more goals and initiatives, then I be coming to you saying this, this isn't fair at this point. It isn't fair to our staff. But if we give the time and the focus, energy, and effort, then to me, it's worth to try to give our families the choice for them to determine what they feel is the best educational setting for their children starting on August 25th. Sorry for a long answer.
No, that's fine. I agree that we have provided the community with choice, and I happen to support all the things that you and Maria specifically mentioned in the last few minutes. So given that we have such a third, if you will, do we have enough professional team members to accomplish our mission if 80% of our kids are coming back to school?
I would say yes. I mean, I think we've seen that time and time again with the Hempfield staff. I'm starting my 6th year here, and I've seen it from day one. Other individuals have been here longer, but there is great pride and great sense of accomplishment, and there's a tremendous support for our educators in our community. And I believe our teachers, just like every year, will do what they need to do for their students. But we have to make sure we're there for support. Tab, Maria?
That's what I would have said, and we will be there for support for them as well.
I agree with that 100%. And to our professionals and staff that are listening, I would say to you that this board, this administration, and everyone else working in this district applaud you and have the utmost confidence in each one of your ability to deliver what's needed to give our kids a great education. And for that, we thank you, and we are extremely confident that you can and will deliver on that in a great fashion. So go forth and do it.
Thank you, Mr. Maurer. We've been working on the reuniting and getting everybody back together. And you mentioned something there that I wanted to just draw attention to. When we were in that pandemic from March to the end of the year, we were all alone. We were Zooming, we were trying to connect, but we weren't in the building. We weren't with our teams. We didn't have some of those level of supports. I was working out of my garage, for crying out loud. So that's something we're super excited about, and we really feel like we'll be that extra nudge to help us out as we tackle this new virtual and learning environment.
And I think the other piece in that too, there were so many staff members who did things that no one really even knew about. The parents did, our students did. I mean, I still am hearing stories from parents about things that their child's teacher did for that individual child. And that, to me, to Mr. Maurer's point, speaks to not only the level of professionalism, but the level of commitment. And I also think, and I said this last week at the meeting, this is not about PSSAs. This is not about keystones. There's going to be dips in the data. But our first priority right now just has to be on reuniting. And yes, we will build that back up, and kids will still do well and move forward and be able to have a good education. But that can't be our focus right now in terms of the testing and the data on that. It needs to be getting our kids back in school and having plans in the events that there is a vaccine or something occurs that we can transition back sooner and move forward on this. But again, if there is the will of the board to have alternative conversations, then we'll have those conversations.
I want to say, just by all my questions, I think you all know this, I have total confidence in you. I just needed to, clarify some points for my own benefit and also for some people who have asked me about it.
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate how you've taken the time to answer all the questions and also to interact with the community. My impression is that is not normal with a lot of administration. So I really appreciate that and just encourage you to, as you keep to work with parents and with the staff, it's going to be awful some days. Let's be frank, it's just going to be terrible. But in the end, I think it's going to work out perfectly, practically perfect. So I think it's also is exciting for a professional educator to have this challenge, and wow, I can try maybe some things I never could try before. And anyway, I just really appreciate the work that you're doing very much.
Thank you. If I may, I won't hold us up too much longer. I do have a couple questions, though, if I may. And before I do begin, I echo the sentiments of Mrs. Johnston, Mr. Maurer, you as well. Yeah, full confidence in each of you, full confidence in the teachers, the staff that we have. My wife and I, we moved here from Maryland 5 years ago, and we sought out this school district. I've said that before. We sought out this school district, and this is one of the reasons. We have the teachers, the staff that I've been able to meet, that my children have had the pleasure of getting to know and learning under them. They're second to none. They're unreal. They're world class in my book. So full confidence, and thank you for that. And I share those exact same sentiments. One or two quick things I do want to just throw out, maybe an idea, maybe a thought. Certainly as I think about option one, option two, or I think about just from a teacher standpoint, and let's be clear, I'm not an educator, I'm not a teacher, but as I do my best to put myself into those shoes, there's going to be a certain level of awareness, alertness, cognizance that a teacher is going to have throughout the day that they didn't have necessarily before, or what they were trained to do. And really there's going to be almost like a feel, they're going to have a feel of a heightened sense of expectations that they have to deliver on, because they're going to have, additional modes of instruction that are happening right before them. And that is going to cause varying comfort levels, no doubt. At least in my experience, one of the top ways to level out those varying comfort levels, some with great comfort with that, no problem, I got this, and some that are very, very uncomfortable with this, is going to be from that training and preparation, Mrs. Hoover, that you discussed, right? And so, let's be straight. There's this model, traditional in-person as well as virtual, they all exist. Simultaneously, they also exist. It's called the high flex model. I'm sure you guys know more about it than I do. It does exist. It's out there. Have we discussed this, called anyone, or brought in best practices, or had discussions with anyone that already employs or applies the high flex model? That course model in their instruction.
So at this point, we have not, pending the outcome of a decision. We will be reaching out to other organizations, some colleges, universities. We've had individuals reach out to us who have some experience in this area as well, to serve as resources. And I think, Mr. Wagner, something else you said from an expectation standpoint. We need to make sure that we tamper down some of those expectations, that people aren't coming out of the gate expecting, as Mrs. Hoover said, this is going to be perfect on day one. My vision of a perfect day one is that time has been spent making sure students, both in person and live, have had that opportunity to just engage in conversation with each other, with their teacher, talking about their summer, learning about routines and procedures, practicing. I think about when we all went to Zoom right away, we saw a lot of those YouTube videos out there, about, oops, I forgot to unmute myself, or, that little doorbell ringing that, have to admit someone. We're going to have to relearn some of these procedures. And that's what's going to happen through those first several weeks of school. It's not going to be heavy academic focus. It is going to be on some of the social, emotional pieces, reconnecting, developing those relationships, heavy time spent on procedures and making sure that, you can hear me, okay, we're good, and engaging in dialogue and conversation, and starting to ease into the academic side, so that when we're teaching, that we're comfortable sharing those screens, we're comfortable and we know the procedures if I have a question or something isn't making sense, or, what do I do if I'm at home and I'm trying to log in and I can't? And students and parents that are wondering, like, I'm missing something and I'm going to be marked absent. And we don't want people to panic. We need people to just pause and have that understanding and be patient, be flexible, have that grace and understanding that we're going to work with everybody and be flexible and take it one step at a time. So I think that's just as important that you shared.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, thank you. I just, if there are resources out there that could benefit us and help us learn a little faster, a little easier, help us not, help us to remember some of those things that otherwise we'd forget, could be beneficial and maybe worth our while.
Several local college professors have reached out because they've been experiencing this. They've been getting ready and kind of working through it. So we'll be looking to tap into some of those resources for support.
Very good. Again, the second question is this, and this could also certainly help for those family members or those parents that are right now undecided. But what I'm curious of too is, to prepare for an upcoming school year, a lot of things happen, right? Letters go out to, here's who your teacher is, and there's meet and greets, and there's things like that. What can we expect? Whether it's option 1, 2, 3, what can we expect on that end? And what's the checklist? If you guys could kind of outline that and speak to that, that would be great.
So at the elementary level, we discussed specifics to what sneak a peek may look like, or new families coming into the district. Typically, sneak a peek happens for an hour, and the community comes out, and they are in the elementary schools meeting teachers, doing different activities. It's not going to look exactly the same this year. However, principals spoke today, and they are, and the one thing I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to how hard the principals are working and how they're collaborating with each other to try to provide as much consistency as possible across buildings so that, everybody gets a good experience. But one of the things that we talked about today was some of those individual phone calls. Offering a virtual sneak a peek for those people who can engage, and for those people who cannot, that questions and those kinds of things come directly to the principal, and they're willing to take those calls and make some accommodations for individual families and students. We talked about how we, and then, after that, the question comes up, well, how do we roll that out? Again, we're going to use some of those first days where we would normally be giving curriculum updates and assessment updates to walk through that with teachers and help teachers to communicate. One of the biggest things that is the biggest message is we want to be able to engage families. We want to be able to connect with our families. And we know that coming back to school for a lot of students, regardless of COVID, is so for some it's exciting, and for some it provides a lot of anxiety. So we are looking at alternatives for all of those types of things, so that we can address the individual needs that families may have, but then at the same time provide that engagement in a safe way so that people also feel safe with that.
Also, if you're talking more from a schedule base, who my teacher is, that type of thing, as we get the results back from the survey, we already have a lot of the schedules built. Middle school's fine tuning. The high school's pretty much at a completion rate. They're still doing some tuning work as well. So once we get those numbers, we can look at that and set up classrooms and get that information out in a timely manner, because we know that's part of that excitement coming back to school. We know that that's weighing on some families who my teacher is going to be and what my experience is going to be. So in the areas we can keep it traditional, where we really want to strive to do that for the families.
Very good. Thank you.
The schedule right now calls for those letters to be mailed out on Friday, August 13th, and the information will be available in Power School on Monday, August 17th. In addition, we've asked the building principals to talk about how they're going to bring their building plans to life. They are part of this plan that we have, and parents and students may have questions about what specifically is happening in the buildings. So we had those conversations today about how they can present that information to students and families, and more information will be forthcoming on that.
And what we asked and talked to them about, and there is some concern that if one building does A and another building does B, there's going to be an immediate comparison. Well, why didn't you do this versus this? Our principals know their schools, they know their communities, and we believe that they're going to be able to bring their plan to life in the best way that they see fit in terms of their community. And so what we are asking is to not have that comparison. Our principals understand the importance of those connections and getting that information out. But it doesn't have to be lockstep, everybody doing the same thing. And we don't want that in our classrooms every day. All of our buildings have their own unique cultures and communities, and we want to foster that and support that. And so our principals are going to bring their plans to life, be able to connect with students, parents, and staff as we move forward, and that's will be happening in the coming weeks.
Very good, thank you. One final question. This will be an easy one, I think, just for clarification purposes, nothing more, because I have been asked this. Granted, we are following various guidelines that we must abide by, right, and follow. I have been asked this in person as well as in other ways. Here we sit in a room, 17, 18 people in a room, less than 25 for sure. How does a school get away with having 26 in a classroom potentially, and we can't do, you know what I mean? We can't have this meeting. So explain, can you shed some light on?
Absolutely. So on July 15th, when Governor Wolf announced mitigation orders of indoor gatherings to 25, outdoor gatherings to 250, I sent a email to the Department of Education. On July 20th in the evening, I received an email. My question was, does this apply to schools? Because it has implications. It's far-reaching if it does. On July 20th, I was told it did not. It only applied to food and retail. And then either the 21st or the 22nd, all school districts received another clarification that the orders did apply to schools. Indoor gatherings of 25 or less apply to schools when it's not around educational instruction. So, and it was very clear in the orders about meetings, assemblies, et cetera. We must adhere to that 25. But in classrooms and on school buses and in cafeterias, it does not apply. And we have to make sure we're properly distanced as much as possible, et cetera. But we have orders that were outlined. They're available on the state's website for individuals to see what it does apply to and what it does not.
Very good. Thank you again. Just wanted to make sure we had that point for clarification purposes. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Continue.
So I'm going to continue with the plan. This was something that was presented in previously, but just to kind of review. What we are looking for in terms of desks, tables, et cetera, is that students are able to be at least 6 feet apart, and that is the goal. Knowing that that's not always possible, we are at a minimum looking at 3 feet apart. Seat to seat. And what we have configured and what our custodial staff and administration have configured are desks all facing the same direction so that we don't have students facing each other. A lot of times students are sitting in pods and facing each other in cooperative groups. So desks will be facing in the same direction. They will be cleaned throughout the day and when possible, and then every evening. And then teachers have a zone that would be 6 feet from the students, where that is typically fitting when we are doing our configurations, is that the teacher area would be in the front of the classroom. This is an example of what in-person could look like with 6 feet apart in the front, and then the 3 feet apart with each of the desks. Okay.
So I definitely want to give a shout out to the high school staff. The high school cafeteria was one of the most difficult areas to reconfigure to meet all the guidelines that we needed to meet. So you can see the split there as far as some very creative scheduling with the gym. So we can have students eating inside the gym, packers in certain areas, eating locations, doing different things with trash disposal. And again, a shout out to Mr. Brooks and his crew as they work to put in different hand washing stations, taking advantage of the outside areas when we can. They really worked hard to make the high school schedule and the high school cafeteria compliant. And to some of your points, you're asking, are we ready to go right off the bat? They realize that this is a huge undertaking, and they're adding additional time into their schedule to accommodate some of these transitions. Getting all the students where they need to those first couple of days is going to be a massive undertaking. But again, just an example of a huge social distancing concern the district had and how we addressed that concern.
And the high school is currently set up in the cafeteria. So at the conclusion of our meeting, if you would like to see what that will look like, we certainly can walk you down there to take a look.
There is no food. It's just the chairs. I thought you'd want to know.
I was in until that.
Speaking of cafeterias, did you have a chance to check about meals for kids who are not, not in school? The free meals? If we don't have an answer yet, that's fine.
So we're waiting for the federal government to go ahead and approve the same type of program that we had the last part since April 1st. But the intent is to provide some sort of free meal, lunch and breakfast at a pickup point at the various schools once a week or twice a week at a given time that's not the same time that lunch is being served or breakfast is being served, so as we don't have to bring on extra staff to accommodate that.
Good, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
Quickly, I just want to address visitors. We are limiting essential visitors only. Obviously, if there's visitors that are admitted, they must adhere to the orders. Different buildings are having different structures for dropping off lunch pails and other things that are forgotten, backpacks, things of that nature. Some of them are leaving them in the lobby and then having other people pick them up. So there's procedures that are specific to each building for that. And we are asking that all visitors will conduct a symptom screening at home, just like everybody else, prior to coming to the building.
We had talked about recess, but just to review, recess will be occurring outside, weather dependent. We are looking at the UV light, eliminating the virus in terms of playground equipment. Those are that's the big playground equipment like sliding boards and swings. And then we looked at individual buildings and how they would handle and circulate the playground equipment if they are using it. So equipment will be issued by grade level, cleaned after each period. We are in the process of making sure that there are multiple sets of equipment so that when one is used, it can be cleaned while another one is being used by another grade level. Some schools, like I said before, are looking at color coding that so that you have certain grade levels with certain color equipment, so we know that yellow belongs to first grade and green belongs to third grade, and continuing to provide that outlet for students. And then if you can look at this picture, we have some desks in our district that you actually have a hook on that they will keep backpacks and lunch boxes hooked to their desk. Other buildings do not have that style desk, so they will utilize space in the classroom. As you can see, we can do some things with lockers, but we can't do 4 students to a locker. We could do 2. We will have students possibly hanging things on the back of their chairs and utilizing areas in the classroom for that.
So the next section, we're going to talk about monitoring student health. We've had conversations already regarding symptom screening, and that will be conducted at home. When we talk about those symptom screenings, I shared the next slide last week in terms of this chart, meaning when you look at these symptoms, any one in group A, at least one of those, please make sure we have kids staying home. In group B, 2 of those symptoms, staying home. Anytime there's an illness such as vomiting, diarrhea, et cetera, kids need to be home. The other parts of this that I just want people to be aware of, the reason why this is broken up is what we're being told, the medical community is using group A, anyone with those type of symptoms, a COVID test is being ordered based on at least one of those symptoms in group A. A COVID test is being ordered by a doctor if 2 or more symptoms in group B. So this is what we are using from just a document from symptom screening, monitoring, people being aware, but I did just want to explain that. I shared the next slide in terms of primary contacts. This is an important slide to understand in that from a contact tracing standpoint that will be conducted in Lancaster County by Penn Medicine LGH. What they're looking at is anytime there is a positive COVID test, the contact tracing questions ask, who have you been around where you've been less than 6 feet for 10 or more consecutive minutes? And I just want to be clear that this is not cumulative minutes, meaning if you passed a person in a hallway or engaged in a 2 to 3 5-minute conversation, you would not be considered a primary contact. It is not until you are less than 6 feet for 10 or more consecutive minutes that you would be contacted as someone who has potentially been exposed, and then you would be given the proper orders from a quarantining standpoint. You would be contacted by a medical professional connected to contact tracing. You would not necessarily be connected by a medical personnel here at the school. We do not do the contact tracing. We will provide information upon request from either the county or the Department of Health. We've also received then on the next slide an updated flow chart. This was developed by the Infectious Disease Department at Penn Medicine, LGH, and has been shared with all the school districts in Lancaster County. And this applies to students or staff or really anybody. And this is the recommendations. You see the 3 columns if you are COVID positive and what needs to occur. If you are a close contact or a primary contact, again, that's less than 6 feet for 10 or more consecutive minutes. You'll see what you need to do and follow the proper lines, and whether asymptomatic or symptomatic. And then also if there's a member in a household who tests positive, and then there's a flow chart for that. And so again, we will be using this, sharing this information not only with our staff, but also with students, parents, community, and our nursing staff as well. In terms of contact tracing, again, I shared that is through Penn Medicine LGH. We will work directly with them and provide information upon request. With regards to school closures, we will work directly with the Department of Health, as they will be monitoring local county numbers as well as state numbers, and they will be providing the direct guidance for schools in the event we should look at an individual school closure or an entire district closure. During the school day, if a student or staff member are not feeling well, if it happens in a classroom, students are not just going to be directly sent to the nurse's office. A phone call will be made, because our nurses will be monitoring not only the number of students that they are working with, but to make sure that everyone is properly distanced. Our nursing staff, it's important to know that we have certified school nurses who are RNs, and we have also LPNs. And so our certified school nurses are responsible for all the students. And while some manage 2 buildings, we have LPNs who are in the health room when the certified nurse is in another school, and they alternate on an every other day basis. And so here this evening, we have Deb Krantz, who, if approved this evening, which I'm going to ask for later, will serve as our nursing coordinator for our district. And she's going to talk just briefly about some of the training, some of the protocols and things that the nursing staff have gone through this summer, and what that they're ready for the upcoming school year. So Deb.
Okay. Thanks. First of all, as Mr. Ramirski was sharing, we follow the Department of Health. So our guidelines come from the Department of Health and from our school physician. That's how we as nurses work. What we've been doing, we've been staying updated, and we're getting webinar and everything we can on COVID-19, so we're as informed as we can be. We've all taken a contact tracing course through Johns Hopkins, which is a certification, so that we are very knowledgeable.
Could you speak more directly into the microphone, please, for the folks at home? Thank you.
Okay. We've been doing a contact tracing course through Johns Hopkins, so we all have been certified with that. That is just so we're knowledgeable about the process of contact tracing, not that we're doing it, but so that we have an understanding of what's involved. We are very aware of those students that are high risk, our students that have underlying health conditions, so we're going to continue to do what we can to keep them healthy in our classroom. We're making plans in our health rooms so that when children come on a regular basis, be it for a medical procedure or medication, we're separating them from the children who are ill so that they don't need to come in contact unnecessarily. We're also making arrangements so that if we notice the student is possibly ill with a possible contagious disease, we're going to isolate them, and we're working at separating them so that they would be secluded until a parent can pick them up.
And then along those lines, if you go to the next slide, please, Mr. Graham. We shared this information, and it's important to note we've received this question: what happens if there is a positive case in a school? If there's a positive case in the school, whether it's a staff member or a student, those individuals will be notified by the appropriate public health personnel and instructed on the isolation protocols. Any of the close contacts or individuals who may have been, come in contact with an individual will receive a phone call or information from a medical personnel individual to receive that quarantine instruction. But the only time that as a school district that we communicate a medical diagnosis with all families in our entire community is at the direction of the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And this is a long-standing practice. So if in the event there is a positive case, we will not be issuing a notice to the school or to the communities, because the appropriate medical personnel are the ones who handle that. Can you just briefly talk about like some of the requirements of some of the illnesses that are out there that we must notify for compared to things that we don't notify for? Briefly.
Right. There's some things like diphtheria, pertussis, measles, those type of things that, even chickenpox, we have guidelines when we have to notify the Department of Health. They take that information, they contact the families, they give us directions. Like if we have 5 cases, then there is some notification that needs to be made. But that all comes from the Department of Health and their guidelines.
Right. So our nursing team will be working not only with the administration, but directly with the Department of Health if there are concerns or increased cases, and we will take our direction from the Department of Health. So I just wanted to make sure that was clarified, because I know that has come up as a question. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you.
The last piece, section 5, in terms of additional considerations, we've discussed facial coverings on school buses. And if you go to the next slide, the reason we are using the term face coverings or facial coverings, this has come up before. We should be talking about masks. Actually, the orders from the Department of Health indicate facial coverings. And so that is the term that we are using. And there are a variety of items that can be used as a facial covering. And so as a district, we're looking at masks, we're looking at face shields, but there are other means for that. And what's acceptable under those orders is what we are going to be following. We had conversation last week regarding school buses, and at the direction of our recommendation, and what we heard from the board was there was support that any student on a bus, no exceptions, are wearing facial covering. When it comes to the school day, our recommendation, as we've been back and forth through conversation about this, is whenever someone is unable to remain 6 feet from someone, whether it's colleagues or students, that a facial covering is worn. However, mask breaks, facial covering breaks, etc., will happen at the teacher's discretion throughout the course of the day. And what that would look like is the students would either go outside, weather dependent, or to areas in the building where they are at least 6 feet apart. At that time, be instructed to take masks off, have that break. At the conclusion of that break, be instructed to put the masks back on and then proceed back to the classroom. In the event in a classroom where there's the ability to have that 6 feet of separation, masks would not need to be worn. But as we've gone back and forth regarding conversations, we do feel like, based on the recommendations at this point, this is something that we wanted to engage in conversations with the board about whether or not there's enough support for this. So I will pause there before we go any further.
So Mike, is a shield considered a face covering?
Yes.
So if you wear a shield, you do not need to wear a mask?
That is correct. A mask, a shield, any type of cloth covering over the nose and mouth would be considered a facial covering. And I'd actually like to read, just so that everybody is clear, this is the order. It is on the Department of Education's website in terms of what a facial covering means. Facial coverings can be made of a variety of synthetic or natural fabrics, including cotton, silk, linen, and for the purposes of the order, can include a plastic face shield that covers the nose and mouth. They may be factory made, sewn by hand, or improvised from household items, and then it goes on to explain. And it also talks about, while procedural and surgical masks intended for healthcare providers and first responders, such as N95 masks, would meet these requirements, these specialized masks should be reserved for appropriate occupational and healthcare settings. So as we are looking to procure N95 masks, they are indeed for our nursing staff, and for individuals who would potentially be in a more higher risk setting where there potentially could be an exchange of bodily fluids, things like that, in really close proximity. So it would not be a universal distribution of those masks.
Speaking of masks, Mike, back in the beginning of this presentation, I think you said 4.6% of the surveyed said they wouldn't be able to wear a mask, but I believe the administration, that those are all going to be vetted and that number will likely be reduced?
Correct. And so, Mr. Graham, if you go back to slide 29.
Because that 4.6% of 7,000 is 322 kids with no masks.
Correct. And so what we would be looking at is we would be reviewing those exceptions, criterias, engaging in conversations with those families. In some cases, as you heard from Mrs. Krantz, we're aware of those high-risk students, the individuals who may not be able to wear masks for whatever reason. We've had families reach out and say, look, we want our child to be in school based on certain situations. They're struggling wearing the mask. And so from a teamed approach, can you help? Can you work with? Absolutely. And that's what we'll certainly be doing. Ms. Galen, would you be able to address on the special ed side? And so she's coming down. And so when you look at these criteria, it's very clear what would meet an exception criteria. I think it's important to note that we do have students in our district where they might not be able to wear a mask due to one of these exceptions. And we are aware. So Ms. Galen?
As far as?
Just in general special ed approaches.
So we have for face coverings and face shields for staff, we have multiple options that we're using for them. And then also for students, we have different options for them to wear as far as face shields. We have face shields with, masks with windows in for them to wear. And then we also have provisions for students who may not be able to wear masks, how to create like dividers. We have plexiglass dividers that we'll be using, again, to make sure that the students and the staff are safe in those situations.
And we're also looking at, on the musical side, working with our music coordinators. I'm looking at Mrs. Hoover here. There are certain masks that have been designed for instrumentalists and vocalists, so that the mask can be on and there's covering to be able to insert into the mouth from an instrument standpoint, so they, woodwind instruments, things like that. We're also looking to procure those. And Dr. Muster, if you can go to slide 31 very quickly. Just so that everyone can see, last week, Mr. Brooks provided an update on the PPE and what we have available. And it has been updated. Mr. Brooks, do you want to just talk about the update?
So we updated what exactly we had in school, which we had a new column. Now, to be honest with you, we have many bottles like this in classrooms that are half or 3/4 full. We didn't count those because that's unfair to give you a number that indicating that would be full. So we have a number of these that are not counted in schools, but this is what we currently have in school, in stock, on order. Some things have been delivered since last week. We have other things going to be delivered tomorrow. We're moving forward as best we can to acquire what we need moving forward.
Yep. And our county order PPE is expected to arrive in the district on August 14th, and that's still on schedule at this point. And so that concludes that section, unless there's questions on that particular section before we get into the final two.
Yes, just to go back for the board members, for the facial coverings for the mask at school.
Slide 30.
Yes. You're asking us, and I think we had this discussion last week, but I want to make sure all board members are clarifying. Basically, the kids, unless they have a medical reason, which will be vetted, or they can be 6 feet apart, or they're having mask breaks. Basically, the kids will be in school then with mask on. And I guess that is our recommendation. The board, are we all okay with this?
Yeah,
with this point?
I am.
Yeah.
Okay. That was just,
thank you.
Wanted to go on because we will be voting, possibly voting for the plan, and that would be included as part of it.
Yep. And so then the final two sections, just to highlight, section 6 is professional development. And this is just a variety of pieces. Again, more coming. Our nursing team will be working on, working with our staff. And I do want to reiterate, we have an amazing nursing team. I actually was meeting with them this afternoon. They're ready. And they're also ready to work with our staff. And as a staff, we need to trust them. They are trained medical professionals, RNs, who are completely passionate about what they do and have stayed up to date all summer. And so they are our immediate go-to individuals. Our district leaders, technology team, reaching out to others for PD for our teachers. I am very pleased. Again, I was on a call last night with individuals from Penn Medicine LGH. We are looking at not only the protocols and things in place, but also looking for them to provide county-wide for all educators, professional development from medical personnel covering a wide variety of topics. And I had asked for this to begin hopefully the week of August 10th. I'm running for at least 2 weeks prior to the start of school. We're working with the Chamber of Commerce as well to provide opportunities and trainings for parents. And we have individual tools here in the district, Safe Schools, other videos and things that we'll be sharing. And then the final section, Mrs. Zimmerman, communications.
So obviously, based on this robust conversation this evening, we have a lot to communicate. So I only have 2 slides here to wrap us up, just to share the topics, obviously, that we're looking to communicate, the school reopening plans and the learning options that has been in progress. We need to be communicating the CDC guidance, social and emotional health resources, trainings, professional development opportunities, our operational supports, the school meals when we have all that ironed out. How do we get families in who are not in person instruction, hotspots if they're needed, school closings if it's mandated, and continuing with the FAQs as we launch into the learning plan for the year. So lots of areas to cover. Final slide regarding tactics. We have our website, we have our school blogs. These are all things that we use that our families should be comfortable with. We're not introducing any new communications tactics. We want to go with meeting people where they are, the social media, mobile apps. We've been doing robocalls to remind people to check out the learning options. We also want to make sure that we're reaching people with our print publications, printed posters. We worked on getting those printed, have those available for people to remind people about hand washing, temperature taking at home, et cetera. We're going to rely on our community partners. We have advisory groups, contacts with ministerium, community organizations, individuals like Power Packs that we've really worked collaboratively with to get information out to the families. Our local media, staff relationships. We know that this is very important to reaching students and families. They have the relationships, whether it's a teacher, a school counselor, social workers, getting out to particularly families who may not be as connected. How do we make sure that we're reaching everyone? And then finally, our district staff. We do our staff emails. We've already started virtual meetings with district staff that are voluntary, and we're housing information on our employee resources SharePoint site for people to reference.
So that was taking a lot of information out to give a summary here. I know we've talked for several last couple board meetings on this, but are there any other questions from board members?
Just one from my end, quick one. I see bullet point number 345 on slide 35 talks about hotspots. So can we just real quick for those students, those families that would choose the virtual option and they don't have internet at their home, what's the answer?
So back in the spring, the board approved, the district purchased, I think it was about close to 200 hotspots. Yep. All of those were put on pause, if you will, for billing. It was a 12-month contract that extends through the end of this coming school year. So we still have all of that hardware, all of the service with that, and it'll just be starting up at the beginning of the year. So we don't have a wait at this point on any equipment or anything. They'll be ready to go pretty much day one.
Very good. So we're good to go for those that choose that option. And
we do. I mean, that said, the day in, day out video conferencing into a classroom nonstop is probably better suited for a straight a home internet connection, a cable connection, rather than something over cellular. That would certainly be our recommendation. We would definitely be working with families to get them hooked up with Comcast Essentials program. That would definitely be the preferred way to go for that option. But we'll work with families however we can to get them connected.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Could you just verify one more time, the letter that's going out is for identifying teachers for the elementary? Does that also include middle school and high school schedules? Mm-hmm. So it's everything, all the preschool stuff. Okay.
Yeah, it's the classroom schedule as well as transportation. And then if the individual, the parent or guardian does not have a Power School account, we're also working to get that letter into the packet as well to make sure that the family can get signed up for their Power School account.
And just to clarify, we're only mailing if they don't have the Power School account.
Correct. Good point of clarification.
So that if they do have a Power School account, that will all be accessible through Power School's parent portal on the 17th, I think is the date we have picked out.
Monday the 17th.
Sounds great. Thank you.